Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay.
I'm Catherine Henderson. I'm president of Auburn, and I want to welcome you to this evening's Auburn Conversation. This one informed by the work of the Sojourner Truth Leadership Circle, whose founder, Lisa Anderson, is vice president at Auburn. The title of tonight is Holding Each Other Tight, Black Women Resourcing Self and Community in an Age of Pandemic. This evening's program is in collaboration with our program partner, Reimagining the End of Life, and their worldwide virtual festival called Reimagine Life, Loss, and Love, which is amplifying end-of-life conversations in response to COVID-19. This festival is taking place through July 9th, and you can find additional information through the link on the chat. Before I turn it over to my colleague Lisa Anderson, I want to offer this grounding intention that was co-authored by Lisa and Dr. Jeannie Blaustein, who is the founder of Reimagining the End of Life, and who is also an Auburn board member. So here are their words and the intention for our conversation tonight. There is no life without death, no love without loss. They are in constant complementary motion. But never before in our lives has the world stood so still. In the face of distance, illness, and isolation, we are here together reimagining a changed world. Kinder, slower, more just. We are reimagining the giving and receiving of love, the cycles of loss and new beginnings, and what it means to be fully alive. We are here. Lisa, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction and for that grounding. Good afternoon or evening, whichever one applies to you, beloved people. It is with a heart more full than I can say that I welcome you to our conversation this evening. Holding each other tight, Black women resourcing self and community in an age of pandemic. We are honored to welcome some of the most dynamic, embodied, and spiritually attuned women I know to share their wisdom with us this evening. I'm gonna just say a little bit about them. They have voluminous resumes. So you'll get a little thumbnail, but what you need to know before I even tell you a little bit of the descriptive part of them is that each of these women has touched my heart with their fire in some way. Some of them have been touching my heart for as long as 30 years, Reverend Dr. Renee Hill. And some of them have been touching my heart for only a month or two, Alua Arthur. But these are magnificent souls who are here to offer magnificent gifts. So I'm going to introduce them to you. Alua Arthur is the founder and executive director of Going with Grace, an end-of-life planning and support organization. As a certified death midwife and attorney, Alua is able to focus on her clients' practical and emotional needs while giving them the space to contemplate the end of life. Dr. Renee Hill holds an MDiv and a PhD in systematic theology from Union Seminary, both of our alma maters. Her scholarly work focuses on contemporary liberation theologies, anti-oppression theory and practice, world religions, and social change. Renee is also an anti-violence activist and trainer who's taught self-defense, self-empowerment, trauma recovery to people of all ages. In her work, she strives to be holistic and comprehensive in her approach, addressing body, mind, and spirit. Renee is also one of the co-leaders of the Sojourner Truth Leadership Circle. Imara Jones whose work has won her an Emmy and Peabody Awards. I want to do like a snap right there about that. Is the creator of Translash Media, a cross-platform journalism, personal storytelling, and narrative project which produces content to shift the current culture of hostility towards transgender people in the United States. I've had the opportunity to be on stage once with Amara, and she is a force of nature in all of the most beautiful ways that one can be that. Carla Gaskins Nathan is the founder and CEO of Zella, LLC, which includes their private massage practice, Rooted Bodywork. Carla is a consultant, educator, and healing artist that believes that true holistic wellness must be rooted in healing, social, and racial justice. And finally, the Reverend Tracy Blackman is the Associate General Minister of Justice and Local Church Ministries for the United Church of Christ and Senior Pastor of the it's the King United. Oh, there she is. I see Tracy. And Senior Pastor of Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri. Tracy was featured prominently during the Ferguson uprisings and provided deep spiritual leadership and counseling during that time. She's also a nurse. And so she's got the dual practicing of being a spiritual healer and a body healer, as do many of the folks in our circle tonight. You can find way more information about them on our website, so please look that up, and you can also just Google them yourself. But I just wanted you to get a little information about them. We're going to turn to them in a second. But before we do, just a few words about practice. We intentionally made this an open, non-webinar space and sort of an open space so that we could see all of our faces, because we had the idea that we were kind of mimicking a kitchen table conversation. So if you have the opportunity, please scroll through and see the folks in the chat with you in this conversation with you at any time. We've had several hundred people sign up, and it's just in these times when we're so separate, it's so important to get an opportunity to just kind of be in each other's presence. So as much as we can, we're going to model that. We're asking everyone to keep their themselves on mute throughout the conversation. And also we suggest that folks put the conversation in speaker view, so that when each of our folks are having a chance to be involved in the conversation, the screen is focused on them. We will have some time for Q&A. So when questions come to you, we invite you to please use the chat function to pose them. We have staff working behind the scenes who will gather those questions for us when it's time to ask a few. We're asking people to please not take screenshots. These are dangerous times that we're living in. We want to respect the privacy of folk and also their ability to not just have their image plastered widely on social media without their consent. And finally, in line with the ethos of the Sojourner Truth Leadership Circle, I want us to remember that in this here place, we flesh, as Toni Morrison said. So let us strive to love each other and ourselves hard and well during this time together, as a way of modeling how we should love each other hard and well in the world at all times. So with that, I just want to dive in, start asking our sister friends some questions. As Black women, I'd like us to start by reflecting simply on the question of how each of you, can you say a little word of how you're supporting yourselves and our people through these times? And when I'm thinking about these times, I'm thinking about the fact that The cycles of birthing and living and dying are continuing on in these moments, as they would ordinarily and in extraordinary ways, as the pandemics, the dual pandemics of anti-Blackness and COVID-19 have our communities under siege. So could you say a word about how you're supporting yourselves and one another through this particular cycle of birthing, living, and dying? Who would like to speak into that first?
Good evening. I thought about this in a lot of ways. I thought about it on the personal sphere, also thinking about it as the collective and kind of squad of folks that I have around me, and also larger as community. And one of the things that's really been on my heart, especially is watching protests from across the country and culturally and globally. I just wanted to really speak into the support that I'm seeing from Black trans women and Black LGBTIA folks around not just COVID, but also the pandemic of anti-Black racism that's happening, and acknowledging that community members in those communities are being asked in a lot of ways to be invisible while they're supporting the work of not just their own communities, but the world at large and humanity at large. And the need to acknowledge the importance of those lives and also those communities. When I'm thinking about that in particular, is that to me is the birthing, that there's birthing that happens that Black trans women don't get acknowledgement for. And it's out of a need of survival to be oneself. And that we don't acknowledge Black trans women and Black LBGIA folks is the architects of social justice that they are. They're literally drafting the blueprints for freedom and liberation for not just themselves, but all Black people and all people. And I just wanted to speak to that first and foremost. Any issue from repro rights to environmental justice, ending mass incarceration in the streets, at the capitals, in the rooms where it happens, that community, our community's there. And then on the smaller level, the squads, the sister circles, people's families of choice. As a queer person, chosen family is very huge, especially in a time like this. Personally suffered a loss in our family of a beloved aunt, and several of you that are on this screen, if you weren't here supporting, this would just be that much more harder to get through the ongoing grieving process of this on top of everything else. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Carla. Anyone else? I'd love to hear. Amara, do you have anything to speak into around that? How we're supporting ourselves and our communities as Black women in these times?
I was too good at muting. Yes, I almost didn't want to say anything because it seems so obvious to me. And I think that the only way that I am getting support and that I am supporting other people is together, right? There's no way that we're moving through this moment without forming tighter bonds with some group of people to move through. So specifically, me and a group of other LGBTQ in that broad spectrum, women have created a weekly check-in call where we get together and speak about the week, how we're feeling, what we're doing. We then, from that, develop accountability plans where we work to figure out ways that we can support each other through the week. and what check-ins and support that we need. And that's been indispensable. And I've also done the same with other groups of people where I have organized people in my community in various ways through mostly digital means of digital chats and all of the rest of it to provide information and support. And then relying on those same networks that I have helped to create or to be a part of when I need support. And so I think that's the way that we get through, and that's together. And honestly, that's the only way that Black women have ever made it. And the way in which we do and the way in which we survive. And that's true both before we came to the United States and after we come to the United States, that we make it together because we're the only ones that care about ourselves in the way that we need and identify our humanity and center that in a way for us to be able to survive extremely rough times. And so that's what I've been doing, but I think there's nothing new in that. That's just what Black women do.
Thank you. I'm really interested. I was really struck by the accountability plans. That real practical information feels really important in these days. Alua, I wanted to get you inside of this conversation because of the particular work that you do around supporting folks through the cycle of death and dying. And what insights do you have around the question that was posed specifically about how that relates to your experience as a Black woman?
Let me tell you, it's been a really, really dense time. You know, aside from all of the COVID-19 deaths and the racial disparities there to what we're experiencing now, one thing that I found most supportive for myself is gathering around and creating communities of Black women in particular that also do this work and who are also holding and creating space for others to move through their collective and compounded grief. It's been so rich to look at how we've all been processing it, understanding and looking at the ways in which I grieve that I wasn't familiar with before. But also, as Amara mentioned before, recognizing our internal desire to want to do and to be of service instantly as the primary focus. So many of us put aside our pain in an effort to support other people and have done so for centuries. And right now, I've been working with a small group of other Black death doulas and talking about our own grief first, making space for our own pain, to give ourselves space to feel its edges and to actually be in it without transmuting it instantly into service, because that's what we've done for so long. So in making space for our own pain primarily, I think that sets a really nice foundation for supporting communities to also do that, like to feel it rather than to immediately go into action about it, but to be with it. That's the only way we work pain, is by feeling it first, identifying it. And as it's been already mentioned a few times over, the pain is current, and it's also deeply ancestral. I'm African, you know, but my pain, the pain that I carry in my DNA is of all the people that I was separated from, that my ancestors were separated from, the people that left and never came home, the fear of the ocean, the fear of villages burning down. For all of us, even folks ended up in the Caribbean, elsewhere, there's a deep, deep, deep ancestral pain around us as well that we get to allow ourselves to feel.
Thank you. That's interesting. I don't want to cut off that first question, but I want to introduce a second one because a few of you have spoken into that. So you can add that, you can think of these questions as a little additive, so I want to ask a question about what lessons are we learning or have learned from our ancestral stories and strategies for survival that inform our present, and that also that point us into a future where our collective humanity is actually can survive. We may not be there yet, but you know, I just know that there's stirrings inside of the ancestral stories that, if you all want to speak into that, I'm looking at Renee and wondering if she's got some wisdom.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's wisdom, but I do have some thoughts. So I was thinking about, Alua, thank you for what you just said. I've been thinking about that too, in terms of my own self-care and working with folks who are going through these times, is that idea of leaning into, it's being with the present pain. It's to acknowledge that, and also see how that is relating to the past, and then imagining what it might even be about the future. So for me, one of the things that's come up, I'm of a certain age, but I remembered the late 60s. I was a kid, but I remember them. And the recent days have brought back a lot of the trauma of 1968 and being a small child and being terrified. And remembering that and feeling that in my body, that was a long time ago, but it's still quite present. The gift that I want to give to myself is being present to myself and to that pain, to be present and acknowledge it. And as Alua said, not just reacting or responding, but to just sit there and just to sit in the moment and see what's there. And from that contemplation, think about what it is that I need. There was that saying, Black women can't live without their lives. And so it's like, what does it mean for me to have my life right now? That's embracing the past. It's also the ancestral past. What has been coming up for me lately, and my padrino and my therapist is very interesting, have really encouraged me to lean into my ancestors, to lean into working with my ancestors. One of the things about me too that you've been reading my bio is that I'm a multiple religious belonger, and I believe that ancestral presence is a deep part of my own spirituality. So leaning into them as if they're actually a past that is always present with us, and listening for what they're saying, and remembering, learning from that, talk about the ancestral past, is the ways that we were able to survive and overcome the ways in which we were deeply harmed and even killed, but that we are still here. And really leaning into that, actually literally looking at what some of my ancestors have gone through, and also what my younger self has gone through, frankly, as a child, and thinking about how does that inform the present, and then how can that fuel my imagination for a future. So it really is that whole life cycle and that whole space and time transgression that's been really helpful to me. But most of all, not pushing the pain away and not pretending it never happened before. And most of all, not pretending that I don't know anything. That's a thing, I think with some of the Black women, some women, I don't know anything. I don't, I even sat down here today and I thought, I don't know. The amnesia tries to push in quickly, but I'm going to ask you that to step back and allow me to really express what it is that I do know and how I know it in so many different ways.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. It speaks so powerfully into one of the themes that we bring up in Sojourner Truth. It's like that leadership work that we're developing is not about finding something that's outside, but that's calling on the fact that our full dignity is already, that there's knowledge is already. Tracy, I would love to hear your reflections on both of these questions, one of these questions, where you're entering this evening.
Ms. Odd, I appreciate all that I've heard. And I think building a little bit on what Renee has said, and certainly what Alua was speaking about earlier, I'm in a slightly different place this time. I am giving myself permission to care for myself and to care for my community in ways that has not always been my remembrance of how Black women show up. And I was on a call earlier today, even when someone was telling the story of their grandmother, or perhaps it was their great grandmother, who nursed white babies from her breast before she nursed her own babies from her breast. And I am trying at this age in my life, at 57, to break some of those cycles that tend to cause me as a Black woman to feel responsible for everyone. And when I say selfishly, I don't mean just as Tracy, but I'm giving myself permission in this, at this intersection of pandemics for me, at this intersection of pandemics for us, You know, we've been in a pandemic about racism for over 400 years, right? And then laying on top of that pandemic has been the economic disparity and the poverty that my communities have suffered inequitably in that area. That's a pandemic, right? And then over that pandemic, I then had to deal with COVID-19 and its effect in our communities at disproportionate rates, directly caused by the previous pandemics, and no one talking about that, and not having the resources we need. So on top of that, then I have to look at this resurgence of vigilante violence because of the administration that we have and the loosing of the chains that we worked so hard to bind up, right? The demons have been loosed in that graveyard, and we're having to deal with that. So it's an intersection of pandemics. And even in the morning of George Floyd, may his memory be a blessing, I also have to deal with the fact that the life of a Black woman gets silenced even in that, right? So this time, I'm going to take care of my community, and I'm going to take care of me, and I'm going to give myself permission not to explain my Blackness or my being or my womanist ways or the needs of my community to anybody who doesn't understand it. I just am not here to educate this time. That's how I'm taking care of myself. And I didn't realize I was as emotional about it until you asked the question, right? I work in a predominantly white environment. I'm grateful for my job. I love my job, but I am not the resident go-to person this time about what it means to be Black and why people are doing this and why people are doing that. I am going to honor the holiness of my no. I'm going to do that. I'm going to give myself permission to lean into my circles and my support structures and to step back when it is enough. I have given myself permission not to read another tweet, not to see another story. I don't need to hear anymore. I know what I'm dealing with. So I'm not going to invade my mind on a constant basis with that toxicity. I'll stop there, but those are the ways that I have to be right now to nourish my soul. And I'm giving myself permission to find joy even in the midst of that, and to celebrate joy and to create joy and to not feel guilty for having joy or looking for joy even in the midst of all of this. I'm gonna see my therapist twice a week instead of once a week. Just those things.
Oh, amen. Amen, amen, amen. I mean, I was reminded a few weeks ago on a call, Tracy, when you talked about being our own stimulus package. And that just kind of what you just said was like it just like summed up that one line that you gave. It's time for us to be our own stimulus package in all that you just offered. I wondered if folks had anything else they wanted to speak into what was just said around both the ancestral stories piece or any additional on how we're supporting each other. Yeah, I saw. I'm wondering, I don't expect you to, I'm wondering, Imara, what are the ancestral stories that are arising from within trans women's circles that I've been doing a little reading on my own, but I'd love to know if you have reflections that you want to offer. Because I think that a lot of times people are thinking that the ancestral stories, they have a particular flavor, and I want to include, what are the ancestors, the rememberies that trans women bring into that conversation about survival stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think of course, they're the natural ones that are very relevant to this moment, such as Marsha P. Johnson. I mean, it's such an obvious one. and such an obvious intersection of Black Lives Matter and trans movement and LGBTQ. It's so obvious, it can't, you just can't overlook it. But it's also, I think, when you look at the broader history of Black trans people in the United States, a documented history that we know stretches back to the 19th century, it's one of survival, it's one of creativity, it's one of the ability to endure, right? And as someone said to me, Cecilia Gentili, who's not Black, but I thought this was very relevant. She said, I feel like I've been living in crisis and in a pandemic-like atmosphere my entire life. And so I actually feel ready for this moment. And so I think that is really important. And I think that one of the things that's been astounding about the way that trans communities have responded is this immediate swing and that people did just after the crisis into forming immediate mutual aid societies that were local, that were cross-country, that were networked. I'm talking within the first week of the pandemic, raising tens of thousands of dollars for each other in a community that's highly marginalized, right? Not looking for other people as the first answer, but looking for and amongst ourselves. And I think that all of those pieces are things that are really important for us to have in this moment. I have to say that for me personally, in addition to the backdrop of that and that wisdom that I just shared, are my own family's ancestral memories. Those are really deeply powerful for me and deeply resonant for me at this particular moment. In all sorts of ways. And it's so funny, a lot of times people will say things like, well, how do you find your ancestors? And the most astounding thing for me is that they find you. Like, they know where you live. They know your address because you are of them, you are from them. And there's so many ways in which they work to connect with us, wherein we have to be open and responsive to that. But for me, for example, my grandparents lived in rural Georgia in a small town of 5,000 on like a little farm just on the edge of town. I used to go down there as a kid every summer, and of course I hated it because I was a city kid. And the last thing that I wanted to do was to go down to what I thought was the middle of nowhere for, for me, of course, like 2 weeks was forever, right? When you're like a kid, 2 weeks you might as well be 20 years. So I would go down there, but so much of their experience and the way in which they lived and the way in which they exhibited survival, like for instance, I would kill for their deep freezer right now. Like for example, and I remember growing up as a kid being like, why are they so obsessed with this deep freezer? Like, you just go to the grocery store and you just get stuff. And this is so crazy, but they were obsessed about that thing. Actually, they had two. And like right now in this moment, I understand and I would kill for it. I would kill for that. And there's so many other things and ways of being and cautions and guidance and advising and just literally ways of moving through the world in moments of peril, in moments of scarcity that defined almost their entire lives, right? Their entire lives were lived at moments that were like this and far worse. And so there's so many ways in the example of their being that actually all we have to do is model, and that will get us through. And that for me is extremely powerful in this moment. And just also realizing that across the grand spectrum of the entire time that we are Black and have been Black, that our experience in the United States and our experience as enslaved people and descendants of enslaved people is a nanosecond. That means that we can't let it take a disproportionate amount of our emotional space. We can't let it take a disproportionate amount of our dignity. We can't let it take a disproportionate amount of our humanity, because this is a nanosecond. All of this is literally a nanosecond in our grand sweep of history and our grand existence, right? And I often remember as well on this point that like my worst days are far better than a lot of my ancestors' best days. And so, like, all of those things help me get through in moments where I'm feeling like I'm on the edge, right? Because we have far more capacity, we have far more depth, we have far more ability and resilience than we can give ourselves credit for.
You
I'm
know,
telling you, I feel like an amen corner. Renee,
yes. Yeah,
Renee,
oh, I was going to add my amen corners, and Mara, thanks for that. And then when you said you would kill for your grandparents' deep freezer, I thought I would kill for my grandmother's root cellar, which is a kind of the same thing. Thinking about my Tennessee grandmother, who was a sharecropper and a housemaid, had a root cellar, and she would put up the fruits and vegetables. It was something that they did. And she had what was never called intensive garden, but that's what it was, an intensive garden where they grew a lot of their food. And just sort of thinking about this time as an invitation to remember those things. I don't know if I'm going to ever be doing that, but I think what it does help for me to think, and actually it's interesting because I don't want to ever think about, oh, it's, the idea that it's great to have a pandemic. That's not true. And it's helping me think about what changes I can make in terms of even more survival and having skills to move forward. Well, can I learn how to do these things? I've learned to do things because I have a family. You're going grocery shopping once a week. So our people made things last for a long time. I mean, even my own parents, they had a deep freezer, and they would go to the butcher and they'd buy like half a cow, and that was supposed to last for the year. So what are those ways that can be beneficial to us? Those ways that would even challenge capitalism and the destruction of capitalism. That learning that we can do something in a different way. So to me, it's really the incubation of a future, a possibility that's actually very exciting. So what am I going to hang on to that is actually something that's an old practice? What am I going to hang on to, and how will that benefit me and my kids, and how will that actually help lead to liberation? Talking about doing for ourselves, for sure. And it's been interesting to just listen to the ancestors there who are saying, this is how we survive. This is how you can survive, and learning those lessons. So I'm really excited about hearing about your grandmother's freezer, especially because it's like right on. My folks had the same thing.
who else had something that they want to share?
Can I just add one more thing on
Yeah,
that?
surely, Amara.
Real quickly is also like understanding that like another thing that we inherit from them is the ability to create joy in adversity, right? The ability to be able to still find a moment that's humorous, the ability for us to create. So for instance, like the D-Nice thing is like one of the most African things I can think of, which is like, we're all home, we're all terrible, let's just start a new tradition of having a party. Like that's it right there. Or things that I do with my friends, sometimes we turn our calls into watch parties, so we all watch the same thing and talk to each other, or we have like playlist parties. So the ability even to find joy is also a thing that we get from them. So I want to make sure that it's not couched in this idea of like survival burden, eking it out, but also how you finding a way to create joy in adversity is one of the ways that we hold on to our humanity in the face of dehumanization.
Tracy, and then Carla.
A couple of things. For me, they reside mostly around the kitchen, right? In the busyness of life, in this moment, I am gifted to have living with me my mother and my daughter. And the slowing down of, not being able to fly, not being able to travel, having more Zoom meetings, but more presence in my home has reminded me of things from my childhood, where most of my lasting lessons were around the kitchen table or in the kitchen with my elders or with my mother. So
Oh, we lost her for a few minutes. The internet got slow. All right, she's a little slow there. Let's see, Carla, maybe you can start, and then we can let Tracy know that she got
Yeah.
Okay.
To cut off and then jump back in. No, just the echoing of the deep richness of that ancestral power and connection. And so, one of the things I frame a lot of my work around is about that sense of rootedness and what does that connection, mean. And for some of us, we do know our lineage and connect to, the ancestors within our lines. And also for some folks, even if they don't know that lineage, then it is about what are the ancestors of writers and folks that you've looked up to, that have inspired your work as well. Because I also always find it important to talk about that because there are folks who don't know that piece. But the thing that's so strong for me, especially in this time right now, is the power and healing of remembering. And that by connecting with my ancestors, it helps me remember that they went through pandemics and just that history and that trauma of slavery. But what I so appreciate about Amar's comment about that nanosecond is the triumph over the trauma. So there is that intergenerational trauma, and we still are going to be working on healing on that. And different ones of us are at different places and with our own liberation within ourselves and also for our families. But right now, the power of remembering that we've known how to take care of ourselves and know how to take care of ourselves, and that our ancestors have taught us that. They just didn't call it self-care. So in my work, so much, gets put on as self-care and wellness being this like white woman Lululemon thing. And it's like, no, that kitchen, that deep freezer, that was all part of the self-care. So my mom stocking that deep freezer, because my mom's from the South and we always had a deep freezer, sometimes two, that was always something that was important, of making sure that you had what you needed to nourish your family, and all the different medicines and folk remedies that my family, especially my family from the South, used to take care of us and to take care of each other. One of the things that cracks my wife up that she's like, this is disgusting, is like my mom would make onion medicine when we got colds, and just like little things like that you get taught. And sometimes with that connection to the ancestors, we have to remember. And so for me, getting through this time, it's me praying literally every day at my ancestor altar, where I have pictures up of the ancestors I feel the most connected to, and calling on them. And also offering, because it's also not about just what can I take, what can I get, but also offering and honoring. So one of the things in New York, I couldn't get flowers to decorate my altar. So I took the time and colored and made flowers and cut them out of paper, because I couldn't refresh my flowers every week for a couple of weeks when things got really scarce around here. So just also looking at that, and that connection is going to come to you, like Amara said, in your dreams, when you feel those gut feelings of I shouldn't go right, I should go left, all those different things that come up that we're like, how do I find my ancestors? Like, they're literally knocking on the door in all these sometimes subtle ways. And if you're in danger, your ancestors will knock on not so subtle ways, right? They will slow you down and be like, baby, you need to stop and look at what's going on and reassess the situation. So also too, just being open to that connectedness, so that they can help provide what it is that you need to not just get through, but to thrive. Because the big piece for me right now is about believing in Black futures. So while I believe that Black lives matter, Black futures have to matter, right? And so as someone who watches a lot of sci-fi, you see certain sci-fi movies where we're not there. That's not an accident. That's not, oh, we forgot to put that in the script. So also remembering that our futures matter, and through that future, our joy has to matter, our breath has to matter, with 2 pandemics that are literally taking our breath, the strength of that. Our joy has to matter, and of course, the wellness of us and all our people have to matter to get through. And it's not about just surviving, but that thriving that needs to happen with an abundance of joy. It's contagious is what I want.
Alua. And then is Tracy back on? Do we know? We'll find out. Alua, please.
I wanted to share how recently an ancestor found me. She was not yet an ancestor when she came into my life. My grandmother died when I was 5, and we lived in a different country for up until that time. So I never really got to know her. And the mother on my father's side was dead long before I came around. So very recently, I got a call from a young woman. This story is shared with permission, by the way. A young woman who was caring for her grandmother at the end of her life. And she invited me in because her mother was no longer in the picture. Her sister was gone, her aunts were gone. It was just her and her grandmother at this point. Her grandmother was no longer verbal and had a serious lung illness. And that just, I mean, what Carla just shared, we're in this disease right now with a disease focus on the lungs and a lot of conversations about not being able to breathe, with the reminder that grief itself lives in the lungs. That is the spot for them. So right now we get to do a lot to pay intentional attention to our breathing. So this woman, her name is Miss Beverly Leacock, adopted me as her granddaughter and death doula for the past 2 months, where I got to sit alongside her, wash her feet, comb her hair, do her nails, sit alongside her granddaughter when she wasn't there and when she was. She wasn't verbal, but she communicated so much love and caring for me as the person who'd come in to help care for her. It's such a two-way street. We think not only, and we've shared many times here, of ancestral pain, but also ancestral wisdom, of ancestral trauma, but also ancestral joy. Showing up specifically in this instance, one-to-one, but also on a large scale. Miss Beverly died yesterday morning here in Los Angeles, very peacefully. And I got to walk with her granddaughter to the funeral home. We identified her and then moved away. So I just want to take a minute to honor and acknowledge my fakey grandmother, play grandmother for the past 2 months, Miss Beverly Leacock. Thanks.
Let us hold this few moments for Ms. Beverly.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, we lost you for a moment, but you were on to something. Do we have to, are you still there for sharing that wisdom that you had?
Well, I am here, and I see that it continued. I don't know what happened to the Zoom, but I'm here for all of the onion medicine. It does work. And the shelling of the peas on the porch is time that's divine. And something else that I find I've reclaimed out of necessity is doing one another's hair, which takes me back to sitting outside in the South between my grandmother's legs as she parted and greased my scalp and all of those things, right? But there was so much wisdom sharing and so much love in those spaces. And I find that in my everyday life, I don't take the time. I won't say I don't have the time. I have the same amount of time I've always had, but I don't take the time to connect in ways that I am connecting now. And I plan on holding on to that, paying attention to the stories my daughter and I share as she asked me how to learn to cook something and how I learned to cook something from her. And the intimacy of those conversations remind me of the reasons that I'm grounded. I'm grounded because my education came that way. I had formal education, but my real education came that way. And I find myself honoring for those that I'm privileged to serve in the church. I find myself honoring this time that families are forced to be together in ways that aren't necessarily happening just because of the busyness of our lives. And so now parents know where their children are academically, not because of a report card, but because they have had to become that primary teacher in a different kind of way. And they're also more aware, at least in my context, of the disparities between what is being offered in certain institutions and what's being offered in other institutions. They're aware of who's getting computers and who already has a computer at home and who has to have their teacher bring them a computer. I'm praying that we will come out of this being better advocates, not because we weren't advocates before, but because we have an insight that we may not have had before. They are watching on Zoom as teachers try to figure out how to teach on Zoom, and what teachers are figuring that out and what teachers are not figuring that out. I feel that as tragic as this time has been, it is a pause that all of creation needs. and has needed. Um, and so I'll leave it there, that not being able to go to my, I went natural last year. And it has been a daily struggle to stay that way during this, because Walgreens does still have creamy crack, but I'm making it, right? And I'm only making it because sisters get on the phone with me and say, try this, or other than that, I look like Don King. So I'm trying to figure it out, right? All of that is happening, the wisdom that we share, the sister girl wisdom, the reminiscing of days gone by, sitting on my deck instead of a front porch. Those are the gifts that I hope that I will hold on to.
Wow, so powerful. And it made me think of two things when you all were talking. One, about how much inside of these stories, when Tracy, you made that comment about awareness, how much of what we learn and what we've shared actually helps us when we're maneuvering out in the world to make concrete policy change and things like those things are intimately connected. Like that knowledge that we have is the knowledge that actually when we are making demands, it's like the wellspring that we draw from to be able to make those demands. Because as Carla said, it's that space where we're imagining the thriving, where we're imagining that thriving. And the other thing I want to say is this morning I was reading from Imani Perry's book, Breath. And it's a meditation on being a mother of two Black sons. And one of the lines that she said is about joy. She said, joy shows up in slivers everywhere. Take it, and run with it, is what she said. And I've gotten that sense from when you all were talking. I wanted to offer up some time for folks who are on the call to some Q&A time. So do we have any questions? We've got our folks kind of fielding some questions in here. One of them that I saw in, we're going to ask people to add them to the chat, and then our folks are going to be able to sort of put them up for me, and I'll ask you all some questions. But one that came up at the very beginning, because of our conversation so much about ancestors, and can you all speak into any resources on how one connects with ancestors? Is that clear enough, that question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can tell you how I do it. I mean, I have an ancestral altar. That's very traditional one with 9 glasses of water, candle, flowers, and my ancestors' photographs that are on it. And, my tradition and practice is that you honor the ego and your ancestors first. So sprinkling cold water for them, lighting a candle, sharing a meal with them, a little bit of food, and saying their names, and just having them really focusing on that altar as a place where they are being called to and are alive, and really trusting and allowing ourselves to see that as real. So it's like, ancestors are people you would talk to like you would talk to any of your living relatives or friends, but to include them in the conversation. So for me, the ancestor altar is a focal point, but I can talk to them anywhere I am. But starting the day and just honoring them that way. And then the other thing is that I've actually been doing a lot of genealogical research, which has been making them more alive and rounded out for me. So I know about the great-grandmother who died from botched sterilization at the hands of a white doctor who did not give permission. She did not get her permission for that. So I'm listening to my elders, my parents, thank goodness, are still living and can share their stories. But I think it's really about understanding that we have this another dimension that we operate in, and so you can just talk to them. I mean, and if you listen, they will actually talk back to you. They'll respond in a dream or in your head or whatever. But I promise you, if you start to pay attention to them, they will make themselves known. I think somebody else said that. I think Imara might have said that, but I think that that's true. They really will come out and make themselves known.
Lua, yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And also, I started thinking about this when you just mentioned the book that you're reading. But every single time that I find a little bit of joy in what's happening lately, I feel connected to my ancestors, because the ways in which we can still feel the deep champagne bubble giggles in our blood, despite everything we've endured for centuries and are currently enduring, to me is evidence that those ancestors are still with me. There's no other way that we can be expected to hold pleasure at the same time, hold this incredible joy. So every single time I'm delighted by this leaf that keeps coming into my screenshot because it just refuses to stay where I put it. And I find a joy and a little bit of tickle in my spirit. I'm thankful and I feel them. I feel them because sometimes it feels like there shouldn't be any other way.
Anyone else want to speak into that question about how do you actually connect with your, like, resources for folk around connecting with an ancestral past?
Can I add something, Lisa?
Sure.
Because you know me, I've known you for a very long time. And you know my thing on this is that there's another part of the story, which is that there are ancestors who are problematic, and there are memories of people who are problematic in our lives. I don't have the same kind of grandmother in the kitchen teaching me stuff experience. I had a grandmother who was, one of my grandmothers was quite difficult human being. So I think that there's something about acknowledging these ancestors as multidimensional people. Some of them are problematic, and even our, some of our current relatives can be very problematic. So it's not all kind of learning, by example. So I think that, me, I'm the mother of two Black male young men. And what I've learned from ancestors is in some ways what not to do. And that's a valuable lesson as well, to kind of mind from that. So I just know that sometimes we talk about ancestors and it's all, it sounds like they were all wise and helpful, and in some ways, some of them might have been, but some of them are difficult folks. And so it's even trying to learn a lesson about what can we learn from even the difficulty with the ancestors, and not, and that's just very true for me. And sometimes it's also like in terms of connecting with ancestors, like my problematic grandmother is one who's around me a lot. I had a grandfather who was, I'd never met, who was very, very present to me in a really positive way. But my problematic grandmother is my trickster. She's around, and my job, I think, one of my roles is to help elevate her, to help to elevate her. So I will light candle for her. Under no illusions, this was somebody who was a nurturing human being. She wasn't. So, and then what can I learn from that, and how can I do something different so that my children's present is different, so they have healthier relationships with me as a parent, so that they can learn to be good and understanding and caring and encouraging parents. So I just want to name that, because a lot of the times there's this one side, but there's there's a lot of different, there's people in the family that can be either dead ancestors or present time who are difficult. So I just want to make sure that I name that.
Yeah, that's really important, because the other thing that points up is, inside of some of these conversations and inside of this work, when people are often valorizing Black women, it's often at the expense of our full humanity. And so when we're telling these stories about how we survive, we also have to tell the story that we're full human beings. And so we get to be vulnerable. We get to have folk in our lineage and in our story who didn't do it right, that complexity needs to be there. And so the narrative that you go away with is not, and so they are super women, or so they are super people, but so they are, so that we are human beings. Another question, I went off again. Okay. Where do you see evidence in the world right now of the world we dream of? Or do you see evidence of in the world right now of the world that we dream of? And by that, the question is where the wholeness and wellness of Black folk is central. Is there any evidence of that that we can see in the world right now?
I see that in the incredible young people that are leading us in the streets. I see their courage. I see their absolute refusal to be diminished or to be quieted or to be silenced. I see their resilience to hold their own narrative, no matter what media says or what other people say or try to interpret for them. I see their courage, which I think operates in spite of fear and not as a lack of fear, to face down whatever they have to face down for liberation. I see their uncompromising, and this isn't, we're not monolithic, so I'm not saying it's everyone, but this is what I see. I see a generation that says, not this time, all of us or none of us, right? In a way that has not been present always, that they're not willing to leave anybody behind. The spirit that I see going through this, even when it means calling each other out about that. I see them taking their authority. I see the spirit of victory in that moment. For me, I'm of the Christian faith. I see Pentecost. That's what I see. And I find great hope. I find great hope in that. I find great hope in young people who are non-conforming to many of the things that in my generation we were taught, or at least I was taught to believe you had to do, or you had to be, or you had to look a certain way in order to be quote unquote successful. I find great joy and hope in the way this generation is defining that for themselves.
We have another question, unless Carl, does somebody else have a response? Because we have a couple of other.
I just had an added thing for the hope, and some of that too that I see from the younger folks. Also too, just that joyous power around no. So there's also the piece of like, no, we're not going to put up with this. No, you're not going to do this to us. No, and some more no. And really looking at embracing and saying no with the same joy and reverence you would sing aloud your favorite song. And that acknowledgement of, even with everything going on, Black women, Black trans women, Black folk are still being asked to do more and to fix it. And so that power of saying no is also part of what I see as that future in our whole humanity being seen as being possible. Because if we don't say no to some of these things, we won't be here trying to do work for white folks, even if they feel that they're co-conspirators. Some of the organizations and companies and everyone coming out with these statements saying they care about Black lives, but if that was the case, we wouldn't actually be where we are right now. So some of y'all ain't telling the truth, right? So I see some liberation through that and calling that out. I get why everybody wants to drop these statements, but part of supporting these the Black lives is also recognizing that you shouldn't be asking your Black staff to do anything extra, and that these young people get that. And that to me is a huge piece of hope, because hopefully they're going to also push us to say no in a greater way.
I love that, Carla, and also the healing circles that are popping up for self-care in the midst of all of this, right? Not waiting for someone else to do that for them. I've seen quite a few just collectives of Black women businesses are under threat. Let's put some money together and make it happen for those sisters. So it's organic, and spirit-filled and is very joyful.
I just wanted to say this question of hope, you know, where do we see it, et cetera. I mean, and does it exist? That was one of the parts of the question that struck me. And I think two things. I think on some level it has to exist because we're fighting for it. If it didn't exist, if it wasn't in the realm of possibility, if it wasn't somewhere within our future, then we wouldn't be fighting for it. So it does exist. We just haven't arrived there yet. It is possible. That's the hope, right? And I think that, you know, there's a mythologization of young people that we have in this country that I think is important but I also think that it's also really what I've been struck by in this moment is the way in which the phalanx of younger people is actually pulling in these cross and intergenerational conversations. That to me is extremely hopeful. You know, when I was walking in the march the other day and there was a 70-year-old white woman who came out of her house to give the Black Power sign. There's something about that is hopeful. So that's one thing. I think we have to remember that there's no segmentation and there's no, these people are doing it, so that means it's going to get done and we ought to have hope in them. There's no, that's not going to work. It's us. It's them and us and everybody. So that to me is the hope, and that's what we have to hold on to. The third thing that I think is, for me, where have I seen it? And I have seen it in so many Black spaces. You know, what I mean by that is that for me, I have seen it in South Africa. I have seen it in Black Brazil. There were glimpses of it, you know, when I went to go visit my grandparents in a mostly Black community. There are visions of our freedom and our ability to be free that we have created in so many places that exist. And our challenge is to expand that space and to create space for that space. But that space exists. And the last thing I think is really important in this, again, is the way in which like the past, the present, and the future are all working together. So one of the reasons why we know we can have a Black future in which we are free is because we have had Black pasts where we are free. Again, this is a nanosecond in our existence, right? It's a small amount of time. And so we know that there are, for most of our existence, that we've done great things on this planet. Not the only ones, but we've done some pretty tremendous things. And that is also a part of us. And that's also driving us in this moment. And that's what also gives us hope. So I think that there's hope in lots of places, but there's also a lot of challenge, and we can't underestimate that either.
To follow up a bit on that idea of where we find hope, I very early on, maybe like a week or so ago, I was like, oh my gosh, am I feeling hopeless? Have I lost that thing that makes me get up every day and do this thing? Like, where has it gone? Because I wasn't recognizing parts of myself, which really troubled me. My younger sister, when I was sharing very, very vulnerable with her, said, well, if you didn't have any hope, you wouldn't get up, you wouldn't keep going back to the computer, you wouldn't keep responding to those emails, you wouldn't keep taking deep breaths before you say that thing that you know that you want to say. If you didn't have any hope, you would not continue on. So clearly you've got plenty of it. And I don't ever want to hear it again. She was like, if you just need to talk about how hard this is, I will listen. But you have hope, and you cannot let anybody think that you don't. Yeah.
Amen.
This is the reminder that this is not, you know, not to say that we have to carry it and cultivate it for ourselves all the time, because I don't want to buy into this idea of like, I got it all and I'm a superwoman. It did take my sister to remind me and to reflect it back to me. But we can also cultivate it within. It exists within. Otherwise, we stop going.
Wow. I have a question with a little context. It's making me think of you, Tracy, although I'm not sure that you're the only one that can answer this. But here's the context. The sister asks, I'm a nurse in women's health, and we have another 6 nurses in my building with maybe 500 nurses and 1 Black obstetrician. We are doing such a disservice to the Black women who come into our birthing center and our gynecology care. What advice and wisdom can you share about how we can support and uplift them with such little representation?
I don't think I have an answer to that, Lisa. Birth is such a personal experience. It's not like you get several times to do that. So the cultural aspects of that in a birthing center are central and crucial. And if the representation is inequitable, I don't know, other than helping the ones you can help, how you address that, other than through the system of demanding more representation. You know, you can only use what you have. So you'd have to fight for more people that look like the people that come into the system, yes. But for the immediate person coming in, I don't know how you address that. I tell you, if there was a way to get to those people so that they're writing responses to your healthcare system, that they don't feel adequately cared for, this is not connected, and it is connected. During the uprising in Ferguson, when Michael Brown died, we had a crisis that didn't go public. And that crisis was after 369 days of continuous protesting. It went on long after the cameras left. We had communities that were suffering from PTSD. And we had governmental systems that were able to bring in therapists and approve free counseling and free visits, but they were all white. None of the therapists on the list, none of them were Black. Not because we didn't have Black therapists in our midst, they were working for free, but they were not on the list of government approved therapists to come into the communities, right? And it wasn't until the community itself began to rise up, because they couldn't help us. I'm not, you know, they were certified, but they weren't culturally appropriate for that moment, and people wouldn't trust them. And so the community itself had to rise up and say to the elected officials, you have to make some exceptions. You got to expand this list, because what we need in this moment is not on this list. That's the only way I know to fight that, because one person can only do what one person can do.
Thank you for that. That question just touched me. And there, you know, just to be able to say this is what one person can do, because to not hold the load of that inequity on yourself feels really important, even as we have to do that kind of fight and struggle. I wish we had more. We have many more questions and not enough time. So we're getting close to time, and I wanted to end in a kind of a non-traditional way. We usually end with folk with a final kind of question, but I wanted to end with kind of an offering, a collective sort of closing or blessing that I would invite us to offer. But before I even say that, I want to first of all just thank you, wonderful, wonderful humans, for this beautiful, beautiful time. I mean, I've been blessed. I know folks have been blessed. I've seen things coming through in the chat. So it's been so beautiful. But as I said, rather than a closing reflection, I wonder if any or all of you who feel moved would like to offer a word of blessing, something to send us forth, a prayer, however it comes to you, just to for us to feel the collective holding of each of your voices, to hear you. So however the Spirit moves you.
I'm walking in a sacred way. I'm walking towards something very sacred. The life. I'm talking in a sacred way, and my voice is strong. I'm breathing in a sacred way, and my breath is visible. I'm walking in a sacred way. I'm walking towards something, something.
Oh no.
Oh, we need to let her finish. Thank you, Ramona. I was asking for the participants, but I thought that was beautiful. So that was a blessing to us. So if you were not finished, Ramona, would you finish? Because that was a beautiful. We can unmute her. Yes, I think she got muted. That was a beautiful blessing, Ramona. Can we get Ramona off mute if she was still blessing us?
I'm done. I'm done.
But
That
you
was a
done? Oh,
very
well,
short
thank
prayer.
you,
Very
Ramona.
short prayer.
That, you know what? That was the spirit, because I said, would the spirit come? And the
You
spirit
did.
came. Yes. So thank you, beloved. That was wonderful. Anyone else? Carla, Alua, Renee, Tracy, Imara.
I'm just grateful to be in this space with all of you, and thank you, Lisa and Auburn. That this to me is part of that recipe of loving Blackness and just challenging a vision, visioning a world of collective liberation where we're all free, all our Black folks are free, and that embracing of love and joy is able to be there and be embodied in a deeper way.
I echo my gratitude for being able to be in this space and for the things that I have learned from those who I shared this panel space with, and for all the beautiful faces. I scanned through all of the pages to make sure that I saw everyone. The gift I take from here and the gift I offer to you is a reminder that no matter how we may feel, we really are never alone. And no matter how much the scarcity and the fight for resources consumes all the channels that come externally, please know from a deep place inside that you are enough. You are enough just as you are. You are enough just where you are. You are enough.
This morning, while trying to sort through some big feelings, Stevie Wonder's As came on my Spotify playlist. And it's one of my favorite songs, might be my favorite song of all time. And as I listened to it and danced and sang the lyrics to myself, I will be loving you always. I will be loving you always. And the nice reminder that loving myself in a time like this, in a world like this, in a body that looks like this is in and of itself an act of resistance. And if I do nothing else but to love on this, so listen to the song when we're done.
I think that for me, what is coming to me is how in this society and the lives that we live, that being present is not valued, right? It's not seen. Because the whole orientation is about taking you outside of yourself all the time, where you have to go, where you have to be, what you have to do. And one of the calls right now is to be deeply present. And I think that for a lot of people, for a lot of us in so many ways, that's deeply challenging. Mm-hmm. We have no choice but to sit with the reality of everything, when so much of our society and the way that it's constructed is about escapism and to escape and to move. And I think one of the things that just came to me, the phrase that came to me was that the reason why we feel that everything is happening now is because now is everything. Mm. And I think that we have to hold on to that this really is the moment and the time for everything. and for us to live in the intensity and the bigness of the moment and to not look for ways to try to escape it.
Mm-hmm. You gonna take us home, Renee?
I don't know about that, but I just wanted to say amen to Amara of thinking the same thing as we're walking in this sacred way that really moved me and touched me and makes me think about how we walk together and how we live together, how we breathe together, how we die together. That I wish you all, as you walk on your sacred way, that you remember to take yourself with you, that you remember that you can stop and rest, that you have your ancestors surrounding you and supporting you, and all you need to do is call on them. So I am happy to walk with you all on this path, knowing that even though we are apart, we are all together. And thank you all for being willing to listen and to imagine and to continue the walk.
Oh my God. That was so amazing. Thank you, beautiful ones. You are so amazing. Carla and Alua and Renee and Amara and Tracy, you are a gift from on high. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are grateful for you. We are grateful that you were born and that you live. And we are thankful to.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Lisa,
Yes.
you are a gift.
Mm.
Thank you for taking us on this journey, for guiding us in the gracious, amazing way that you do.
Mm.
Thank you for creating this space.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh my God.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Auburn team.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Reimagine.
Thank you, Reimagine.
Reimagine.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And I wanted to let you all know that if you want to continue, because this is the beginning, there's the whole Reimagine Festival that is happening right now, and we put the information about that in the chat. But we also wanted to let you know that if you wanted to continue to participate with Reimagine this evening, they have their monthly candlelight vigil tonight, and we've posted the information so that you can RSVP to that in the chat. So please take advantage of that resource. They do beautiful holding work in these difficult times. Thank you again, beautiful humans. This will be recorded, so you will we'll make it available for folks so you can share it with your people. And this concludes our Auburn conversation. We will be with you next time, and be blessed. Be blessed. Catherine, did you want to say anything to close? Okay. So we're done, beauties. Good night. Love yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.